Today, we're talking about the tragic waste crisis in Italy. Picture this. For over 40 years, the Italian Mafia has been illegally dumping and burning toxic waste across the countryside of southern Italy. The results? A health crisis so severe that thousands of animals and plants have died and cancer rate around Naples have skyrocketed. In early 2025, the European Court of Human Rights finally held the Italian state responsible for failing to stop this environmental disaster. But how did this all start? Let's go back to the 1980s. Italy passed new law which defined different categories of waste and introduced the polluter pays principle. That meant public institutions were no longer solely responsible for covering the cost of waste disposal. Instead, those who created the waste, like companies and municipalities, had to pay for managing it too. But here's where it gets interesting. The Italian Mafia swooped in, offering to handle waste collection and disposal at an incredibly cheap rate, sometimes 80% cheaper than legitimate companies. How could they offer such low prices? Simple. They weren't actually disposing of the waste safely. Instead, they were dumping it in fields, burning it illegally and burning it in open air, in the countryside, far from wealthy areas and touristic spots. In 1994, the Italian government finally acknowledged that they had a massive problem. They declared a state of emergency and tried to take back control. They built incinerators and recycling plants, but here's the catch. Most often, they chose the cheapest option, not the safest or most environmentally friendly ones. The government also said that each region should handle their own waste, moving their responsibility to the local level. But it created a new problem. The poor southern regions didn't have the money or infrastructure to manage waste properly, while the Mafia still had deep roots there. So waste from the wealthy northern region kept flowing south, making the problem even worse for the local community. In our research, we explained that this isn't just about criminality. It's a symptom of a much bigger problem. Throughout this crisis, one thing remains constant. Making money was more important than protecting the environment or people's health. Whether it was the Mafia cutting corners, companies choosing cheap disposal, or government picking the lower bidder, profit always came first. The people who suffered were always the same, local communities who had no voice in these decisions. So what's the answer? Our research shows that we need to completely change how we think about waste. Instead of seeing it as something we can hide away or as another way to make money, we need to recognize that waste doesn't just disappear. It affects everyone, but not equally, and some people bear the burden far more than others. The waste crisis in Italy shows us that waste is not a purely technical issue. It's about power dynamics. Defining what counts as waste and what kind of waste it is anything but obvious or clear-cut process. Behind every bin or landfill, there are decisions, pressures, and struggle. Certain actors are pushed, influenced, or even forced towards specific goals. This means we should actively consider beforehand who will be affected by our waste practices and give them a real say in decision-making processes. It means creating systems that works for everyone, not just the wealthy. But it also means rethinking whether and how we consume and produce in the first place and reflect on the entire life cycle of product, not just what happens at the end. Because the Italian waste crisis isn't an isolated case, and waste is one of the most urgent issues fueling the erosion of our planet.